It is my very great pleasure to introduce Deborah Hammond and Jack Spicer, who really don't need much of an introduction. Both are longtime Hyde Park and Kenwood residents, active in our community, and the ones we must thank that we now have our beloved point. They saved it once, and since that isn't enough, they continue to monitor the situation, promote awareness, and provide the crucial work, background, and study that continues support and promote the preservation of the point. Jack is a retired professional landscaper who continues to work full time to preserve our precious landscapes and historic legacies. Debra adds her expertise on business strategies, finance, and operations. We are very grateful to them for joining us today to fill us in on more of the background and the challenges of saving the point and to answer any questions. Jack and Debra.
Oh, Susan, thank you very, very much for that introduction. I really appreciate it. We are the Promontory Point Conservancy, and we do our best to represent the entire community. So we're going to give a little rundown today to try to help people understand where we are at the moment. And by the way, just as a little bit of a killer at the end, we're this week we've had some really, really good news, so we're feeling very positive at the moment. We'll talk about that in a little while. This is one of a series of community meetings that we've had over the last 6 weeks. All the other ones have been live, so this is the first time that we've had a chance to do this in this video format. So this will be really fun. We'll see how it works. At the previous meetings, we've had as many as 25 people. We've had as many as 100 people. We've had young people. We've had old people. We've had many elected representatives who have attended this as well. It's been really, really gratifying. Um, by the way, it is a beautiful day in the neighborhood for those of you who haven't been outside yet. And we'll try to hope that there's time after this meeting so that you can get outside and enjoy the wonderful weather that we're having.
At Promontory Point.
At Promontory Point, yes. Um, as, as you know, we've been at this for 25 years, and we've had tremendous support from the community over that time, but we've also had really strong support from elected officials, from Leslie Harrison back way at the beginning to her successor, Desmond Yancey, Congresswoman Robin Kelly, uh, Cook County Board Supervisor Bill Lowry, and State Senator Robert Peters. They've all been really, really supportive of us. And it's beginning to coalesce, and we're having a lot of effect on both the Park District and CDOT and the Army Corps at the moment. Um, Deborah's going to go through a presentation that will give as many of the details as possible. And then after that, we'll have questions and comments. And we'll stay on as long as people have something to say. So Susan, thank you very much. And here we go.
So we're gonna be talking today about primarily the four engineering reports that we just released in January, and they demonstrably show that the point can be saved. So Promontory Point, you all know well, runs from the boundary of East 54th Street to East 56th Street from South Shore Drive to the waterfront. It was conceived originally in Burnham's 1909 plan for the Chicago lakefront as the Promontory. And I have to say, periodically we run into people who still call it that, the Promontory. We all think of it as the point, of course. We're going to be talking specifically, it has multiple historic features. We're going to be looking primarily at the 3,150 linear feet of revetment. Um, and that's really what concentrates the fight to preserve Promontory Point. However, it does affect other features like the landscape design, as we'll talk about. So Promontory Point is the southernmost piece of Burnham Park, and Burnham Park runs from Northerly Island all the way down to 57th Street Beach. So Promontory Point is the last historic stretch of this limestone breakwater block structure that once graced the entire Chicago lakefront. It was a WPA project that ran from the 1920s through the 1930s. There are a few places like at La Rabida and Morgan Shoal where there's still the original limestone revetment. Promontory Point, for certain, still maintains what's called its historic integrity, and that's part of what we're going to be talking about today. So what is a revetment? A revetment, it comes from a French word, it turns out, but the verb to revet means to face the land with some kind of layer of stone or brick, or of concrete for that matter. So a revetment is a very special kind of seawall that's designed in a way to absorb wave energy and thereby protect the land. What we have here is a picture of the Ellis Island historic seawall with Manhattan in the background. So the National Park Service just had this historic seawall restored. It was a 3-year project, and this project was instrumental to us because it leads us to the to McLaurin Engineering Group, the engineers that we hired to do the 3 studies, engineering studies of Promontory Point. So what is preservation? I was reading a history of the civil rights movement by Cedric Johnson, and I found this quote here. He's talking about the civil rights movement, that out of post-war urban renewal come these disruptions that really are affecting communities of color, and that this was one of the aspects that drove the civil rights movement in the 1950s, 60s, and early 70s. What struck me about this was that this is also what drove the 1965 National Historic Preservation Act. So because of large, massive, usually concrete urban projects, um, neighborhoods are getting, things like expressways are bifurcating neighborhoods and destroying communities and cultures. I grew up in Los Angeles, so I saw this happening to the historic Japanese, Chinese, and Hispanic communities in Los Angeles, as well as the Black community. The 1965 National Historic Preservation Act has regulations about how it gets implemented. And there's 2 that are particular to Promontory Point. The primary one is the Secretary of the Interior standards for the treatment of historic properties. And it sets up 4 criteria: preservation, restoration, rehabilitation, and reconstruction, for how historic features at a historic property can be need to be treated and need to be how they need to be repaired and preserved. So part of what we are doing is setting what those treatment standards are for Promontory Point. So the point is double landmarked, thanks to Jack Spicer here. So here we have the dedication of the National Register listing.
Well, really, thanks to Leslie Hairston.
And yeah, Leslie Hairston was critical in all of this. And thanks to the community putting a lot of, sending 537 letters to the Commission for Chicago Landmarks. The point was landmarked as a Chicago designation, not to the pleasure of the Chicago Department of Transportation, CDOT, or to the Park District, but the pressure of the community really drove this. Now, landmarking provides some protections against demolition, and it slows down the process by bringing in preservation regulations. So those regulations that come from the 1965 National Historic Preservation Act, and those 4 criteria for how to preserve a historic structure. What we found out through FOIA, but also from CDOT directly, is that CDOT has a condition study of Promontory Point that says that the limestone revetment has failed. And what that means is that because they're saying it's failed, they allege that it's failed, it can be demolished for safety reasons. So this becomes very important in our work going forward. So back in June of 2022, Mayor Lightfoot says, basically, she's clearly aware of this CDOT condition study that says that the points revetment has failed and it has to be destroyed and replaced with something else. And this gets us fired up. And then the U.S. Army Corps, to this day, on its official Promontory Point project page, says that the limestone revetment at Promontory Point has failed. It's deteriorated. It no longer functions for storm damage and shoreline control, which is that's what they're funded for. That's what they care about. And that it needs to be replaced with a new structure. And through FOIA, we got this design here that you see. So we've got a concrete revetment, and then they've repurposed some of the limestone blocks as a kind of wall in the parkland. So they're not a functioning revetment. It's a new repurposing of the limestone blocks for really a decorative and ornamental purpose. So through FOIA, but also through some very fortunate leaks that we received, we do know what the U.S. Army Corps, CDOT, and the Park District want to do at Promontory Point. And we also know how much what they are costing, what they expect to pay for this. So they expect to spend $100 million. They want to build a limestone, a concrete revetment with concrete steps, and they want to spend an extra $25 million putting limestone cladding. So what you see in these renderings here is a limestone cladding that's been pasted onto the vertical of the step part of the revetment to make it look and feel like a limestone block structure. So they think that we won't be able to tell the difference between this and the historic structure that we're used to. It's not what we want. We want the limestone block structure fixed. So we go about hiring our own coastal and structural engineers again. This is the fourth time that the Conservancy in 25 years has done that. We have two questions. Is CDOT's condition study true? Is the revetment beyond preservation and repair? And if it's not, are there preservation options that will meet the Army Corps and CDOT's requirement for coastal resilience? So we find McLaurin Engineering. They're based out of New York and New Jersey. They've worked on every inch of Manhattan Island on the waterfront. This is their expertise, waterfront structures. They are a contractor of preference for the U.S. Army Corps through their Marine Design Center out of Philadelphia. They work with the Corps or for the Corps on all of their waterfront work. We're really fortunate to find them, an extraordinary firm. And then we also really lucked out in getting Jenny Elsner to work with us for a historic structures report. Jenny is a premier engineering firm that works for the Park District and for the city, and has probably the premier preservation division. So what you see here are some of McLaurin's pictures. They came out and did a site visit in May of 2023. They used drone aerial technology to map the entire limestone block structure above the water. And that's what you see in that sort of gray CAD CAM drawing. It's down to the smallest fissure in the rocks, and they captured also the carvings that are in the rocks. McLaurin, because it specializes in waterfront structures, has engineers that are also divers. So they came back for more site visits, and they did underwater survey, and then using technology, they were able to, and cloud technology, they were able to map the above water images with the below water images. So they have this complete 3D model of the entire revetment at Promontory Point. It's quite impressive. So in January, we held a press conference and we're very proud to release our studies, 3 studies from McLaurin and a historic structures report from Miss Jenny Elsner from WJE. And we're going to be looking at the highlights and findings of these. So the historic structures report, it's required by the regulations for the Secretary of the Interior, standards for historic preservation. It's something that ought to have been done for Promontory Point back in the original 2000 to 2007 Save the Point initiative, and it's never been done by the Corps or the city. It works pretty much as a master plan for the design and construction, planning for any historic property, for decision making, for budget and scheduling, and then it also acts as documentation. So it's settling what the historic features are and their condition and what kind of treatments under the SOI standards need to happen for repair. So what was Jenny concluded is that the limestone revetment at Promontory Point can be retained and repaired, and as we'll see, that corroborates McLaurin's condition study. That the historic features actually maintain their historic character, that they're intact, and that they have historic significance and integrity. Jenny determined that rehabilitation is the most appropriate overall Secretary of Interior treatment. So that means rehabilitation means that there can be modifications, but you have to go back to the preservation standard, which is basically in-kind materials, in-kind, in-place repair, and that, but there can be adaptations. And so we'll be looking at what those adaptations are in McLaurin's other reports. So McLaurin's condition study came back that the existing limestone block structure has not failed. It contradicts CDOT's condition study, that in fact it functions in good condition right now for storm damage and shoreline protection. It's doing its job, and that it can be retained and repaired, very important. And that if it's repaired and maintained, this structure has another 100 years of service. This is a pretty impressive statement. The revetment is 86 years old. Right now, it's received little to no maintenance over that time, and yet it's still functioning. What McLaurin found is, and that's what the map to the left shows us, is that there are 6 distinct sections to Promontory Point's perimeter, and that each of them has their own condition. So if you notice on the right, the orange section, that's 1,300 linear feet on the south side of the point. It's in relatively good condition. It doesn't get battered by waves and storms the way the east and north sides of the point do. And so it can be repaired at a significantly less cost. The light blue section is what we know as the coffins, and we'll be looking at that. And then you've got the green, yellow, powder blue, and orange, dark orange sections, which each have their own features and have their own conditions. So we'll be looking at those in our alternative design study. So the condition study found 5 elements that make up the revetment structure. There's the upland parkland, the step stone revetment, and then the limestone block promenade, which is the platform down to the water. There's the subgrade material that's underneath the promenade, and this becomes really important. And then there's this timber cribbing structure, which was built back in 1937 to 1939 and was the way that the point was built. It, as we'll find, it doesn't really serve a purpose anymore. It was simply for the original construction of the revetment, of the limestone block revetment. So what the conditions study determines that we see erosion obviously at the point, and the cause of that erosion is not the failure of the structure, but in fact, there's inadequate parkland drainage. So up on the upland grass, the windswept spray from the waves that are the storm waves that are hitting the stepstones is getting blown out into the parkland, and then it's pooling. And because there's inadequate draining and poor maintenance, what's happening is it's causing erosion there, both of the parkland, but also of the material that's underneath the revetment. And then on the lakeside facing part of the promenade platform, that front structure has eroded over time, and waves are coming in and they're undermining those limestone blocks in the platform and washing out the subgrade materials. So those are the two areas where repair is required. So this was a really important finding. McLaurin's coastal vulnerability analysis is basically takes the Army Corps and CDOT's requirements for storm damage and shoreline protection, and that's what they're funded for, and applies it to the limestone structure as we know it, but also as if you repaired it. So what it looked at was things like design waves and water levels, things that the Corps keeps meticulous track on. And it applied these standard procedures to the revetment. And what you see on the right is, this is an extreme non-historic wave. This is a wave that's never been recorded in Lake Michigan, but it's 7.7 feet over normal height. And what you see is the wave is lapping up against the second tier of the limestone steps. So when we see erosion in the parkland, what's actually happening is the spray from that is getting blown by the wind out into the parkland and then causing erosion as it's trying to get back into the lake. The conclusions of the coastal vulnerability analysis said that the limestone structure meets the storm damage and shoreline protection requirements set by the Army Corps and CDOT, that it's resilient and can withstand all kinds of lake dynamics, including the energy from design waves, water levels, and lake forces, that it performs well for stability and durability, and that the existing displacement of the limestone blocks, particularly in the promenade on the north side, is due to the loss of subgrade material. So that's very important, and that the parkland erosion that we see is caused by inadequate upland drainage and lack of maintenance. So the erosion is not, that we do see at the point, is not evidence of the overall failure of the limestone block structure. So moving on to the alternative design study. This was, if you remember, we were asking two things. Has the revetment failed? And it hasn't. Those two prior studies told us it's in fine shape, but it needs fixing. And then we wanted to know, well, if it can be repaired, how can that happen and still meet the Army Corps and the CDOT's requirements for coastal resilience? So the alternative design study looked at 5 different ways of fixing the limestone revetment at the point, and also did a cost-benefit analysis for each of those. So if you remember back in the condition study, McLaurin found that there were 6 different stretches of the limestone revetment that each had their own condition. So what they did was they came up with these alternatives And then they applied these alternatives to different sections depending on the condition, but also they could be applied because of budget considerations. So if you see at the table on the left there, some of these options are more expensive than others. And as you see, some of them are actually as expensive as the Army Corps and CDOT's cost per linear foot. But how you mix and match these becomes where there's actually economic savings for fixing the point. So the 6 different sections each have their own conditions and require their own solutions. And there's not a one size fits all solution for Promontory Point. So that sets up this mix and match approach to how to preserve the limestone block revetment. And when doing that, it brings in all kinds of cost savings. The other thing that it does is that the Army Corps CDOT plan will close Promontory Point for 5 years for 61 months. If you take a section by section approach to construction, then you can keep most of the park open to the public at any one time. And that becomes very important to people. The alternative design study also found that that the repairs were focused in 3 areas. One, tow protection, and we'll talk about that. The restoration of the subgrade material beneath the promenade platform, and then some kind of marine mattresses and geotextiles in the parkland that would reduce the water scour and improve drainage. Um, there's multiple options here. We are not offering a competitive plan to the Army Corps CDOT plan. What we're saying is that there's multiple ways that preservation, preserving the limestone revetment can meet the Army Corps' requirements for coastal resilience. The rehabilitation preservation standard also allows for changes and adaptations. And one of those would be for universal access, that we could do ADA compliance and upgrades. And we'll look at the options that we're offering there. And then the cost benefit analysis shows that it's both cheaper to pursue preservation options at the point for both construction and maintenance. So this is something engineers like to do, including the Army Corps. So they set up these criteria and make these matrices, and then they apply ratings. So what you see here are the 5 alternatives that McLaurin came up with for fixing the point, and then the Army Corps' plan. And needless to say, there's huge advantages to preserving it. There's nothing wrong with the Army Corps CDOT plan for storm damage and shoreline protection. However, it doesn't meet any of the Secretary of the Interior standards for preservation, which also apply. So we're offering alternative ways to both marry storm damage and shoreline protection requirements with preservation. And that's what this shows. The other thing I like about this chart, if you look at the very first line, ease of construction, the easiest one to construct is demolition and concrete. And we'll look a little bit at why some of these preservation options are a little more tricky in terms of implementation. They're not more costly, they're just more tricky. And it really has to do with this, how the revetment was built informs how to repair and fix it. So this is a picture from 1937. And what you see along the perimeter are all these little tiny cranes that are positioning the limestone blocks in the promenade platform and in the stepped revetment. And something like this would have to happen again for the repositioning of the box, for restoring the revetment. It also, these little tiny cranes have a lot of flexibility, and it means you don't have to clear cut the trees at the point, which is what the Army Corps and CDOT plan would require. But you'd have to do, it doesn't make it easy to construct, but it is feasible and doable. So we're going to look at quickly at the options, McLaurin's 5 options about how to preserve the point, and we'll look at them in different elements. So this is the upland parkland area. And if you look at the engineering drawing, you can see that they are putting in a marine mattress, which is a new geotextile technology that would allow for water to seep out and not pool and thereby not erode the parkland or the fill behind the stepstones. So there's geotextile fabrics in this restoration plan. And this would solve one of the 2 major problems at the point, which is the lack of adequate drainage. So here we're looking at those northmost sections of the point. And at some point in its history, I guess the Army Corps and the Park District have dumped a bunch of rubble mound on top of the limestone revetment. It turns out that it's all underneath there. It's under those rubble mound stones and it's under some concrete slabbing. But in this is a good example where the stepstones need to be, the material needs to be removed and the stepstone needs to be, structure needs to be repositioned and fixed. And then the promenade, so we're looking at the south side here, where you can see that as the front edge, water-facing edge of that underwater crib structure has eroded, the waves have come in and washed out the subgrade material. So that's the second cause of erosion at the point. And you can see how the limestone blocks are settling because the fill that's supporting them is no longer there. So lifting those blocks up, replacing the fill, there's a couple of options here and we'll look at that. One of them is just to put new fill back in, which is just gravel and broken up rock. And it gets compacted and then just put the blocks back on top. In this case, we're looking at the north side of the point where the north edge of the coffins hits the limestone revetment. So here McLaurin's offering another option. And if you see where the red arrows are, there's these concrete caissons and they're like gigantic cinder blocks that could be used to reinforce the substructure so that the blocks they create a lot of strength when they're in their position because they're like puzzle pieces and together they make for a very strong structure, but giving them that vital support underneath is important. And then the timber cribbing, we've got options for repair. There's a number of them. The whole structure doesn't need to be destroyed because the timber cribbing structure is obsolete. Like I said, it was just put in there for the original construction of the subgrade material, but it can be used now in various ways. So if you see the arrow there, McLaurin's saying one of your options is you could just cap off the timber cribbing with some concrete if you just wanted a little more reinforcement. You could also, that exterior water-facing edge underwater needs some attention because it shouldn't be allowing waves to erode the substructure, the subgrade material. So, but whether that's timber or steel is part of the decision-making that needs to happen. So one of the things that McLaurin adds to the 5 elements is a 6th, toe scour protection. So the erosion we see at the point is all scour, it's all water scour. So putting in some kind of toe scour underneath the water to sort of dilute the strength of any storm waves coming in and hitting the point is highly recommended, and how that's shaped and structured is really important. There was, back in the original structure, a toe protection like this. It's all washed away over time. There's been no maintenance at the point, and that's made that water-facing edge of the revetment vulnerable to water erosion underneath. So here we see two options with rubble mound at the top, and then people swim at the point. So there's been a lot of community input about how they want easy access into the water. I have to acknowledge that the park district says that swimming's not allowed at the point, but it's been going on since before it was a point, the point before it was a park. But it could be in some places that the limestone blocks continue down into the water, so there's easier access for swimmers. One of the things that the Secretary of the Interior Standards allows in a preservation project is adaptation for universal access or ADA compliance. So we were very fortunate to work with Frank Heitzman, who's the lead Illinois architect for ADA compliance, and wrote the state guidelines. So Frank worked with McLaurin and us to come up with um, some design considerations for ADA access to allow people access down to the promenade and the waterfront. So Frank's proposals have a very gentle 1 inch over a 20-inch, 1 inch rise over a 20-inch spread. So these are very graceful ramps that go down. In this case, we're looking at the north edge of the revetment where it connects with the concrete at the north of the point. So he's proposing both a ramp at a 120 grade, but also what he calls stramps. So these are stairs that have a long tread and a low rise that are easier to navigate for people with walkers and canes, but would also be easier for just about anybody. So this could be for people, for children and for strollers to get easy access down to the promenade and to the water. I happen to believe that Lake Michigan is probably Chicago's best cooling station. So um, here's another design. These are all just possibilities. We're looking at the coffins at the east end, excuse me, where we've got these graceful ramps down to a concrete promenade platform. And we've got stramps again. And the advantage to this is it's also close to the field house bathrooms. And then at the south end, the agencies have already put in an ADA access. It's not the 120 universal access design. McLaurin is offering some ways to get people over to this part of the point and make better use of this. So they're proposing a kayak dock and a launching ramp. I don't know. We don't know how the park district feels about this, but so far the community thinks this is great. So our studies prove that the limestone block structure has not failed. It functions in good condition right now. It can be retained and repaired, and that there's an array of design options to do that. And that if you do that, it performs well to the core and CDOT requirements for coastal resilience. It can be adapted for universal access. It costs less or no more than the core CDOT plan, and that it can be maintained for less than the concrete revetment. So our plan is the only plan to date that mirrors storm damage and shoreline protection requirements with the SOI preservation standards. So we're offering a win-win to meet everybody's needs. And most importantly, preserving the historic limestone block structure preserves the community that's gathered at the point for nearly 100 years. So as I said, this was the point was constructed in the late 1920s, and it was a garbage dump and parking lot for a decade before it got made into a park. But people have been swimming there and getting out to the lakefront since the 1920s. So it's an important part of Southside culture. Um, and our survey shows that people come there because it's peaceful, they feel safe there. It's a real asset and an important place in the city.
Thank you all. We're finished with that part. I want to make one remark and then we'll take questions.
Do
What
you want to talk about the letter?
I do.
Okay.
What Debra said there at the end about the community is really the most important part for me. This isn't about the limestone blocks. We want to preserve those, but what we really want to do is protect the community that really, really has enjoyed the point for all this time. We've raised a number of hundreds of thousands of dollars, almost all from the community, both mostly to do these studies and also other things that we've done at the point. So it's
And
really,
we should acknowledge that the Richard H. Driehaus Foundation helped us finish our engineering studies with McLaurin, and also the National Trust for Historic Places and Landmarks Illinois gave us matching grants to work with Jenny on the historic structures report. So we're extremely grateful to them. But Jack's right, the majority of the money came from the community for these studies.
a little bit of recent news. By the way, I'm fairly optimistic at this point about us winning. I'm kind of at 70%. Deborah's a more pessimistic person, so she has a lower estimate. But
3%.
but
It keeps me going, you know?
we've had some really good news this past week. There's a new candidate for the CEO of the Park District. That's Ramirez Rosa. We wrote to him after we heard that he was going to be appointed, and he wrote back to us within 2 hours and said he was very supportive of our efforts to preserve Promontory Point, and he would fight for us. So that's really important because we have not had much support from the Park District so far. And also, just yesterday, we had a series of emails that went back and forth between the federal agency that's in charge of this project, instructing the Park District and especially the Army Corps,
Sorry.
instructing the Army Corps to play by the rules, which they have not been doing. And that was really encouraging. They don't usually step out like that. In this case, they really see the need and they see the resources that we put into it, and they really appreciate, especially the community support. So now I'm going to turn this over to anybody who would like to ask a question. I'm not sure how that's going to be monitored, but we will do our best here.
So in the chat, I put links to all the 4 studies we just skimmed through for the full studies, but also each one has a 1-page fact sheet. So that's in there. And we
Also, we're asking people to write letters, one letter to the electeds who have been really, really supportive of us. And there's a separate letter for the elected officials who haven't really helped so far. And Debra will post that on the chat as well. If you have a chance, it's a form letter which you can adapt to your own voice. And these letters really, really matter. Elected officials pay attention to the emails that they get and the phone calls that they get. So please
Do you
help.
want to quote Robert Peters, who said,
Go ahead.
so Robert Peters at our press conference in January said, these reports show that we've got the engineering facts, we've got the economics under control. So this is about politics. So that's why we're doing this letter writing campaign. There's 2 letters you can customize. They're form letters. One just thanking the electeds that have been supporting us all along, and a second, a letter of encouragement to others who haven't stepped forward yet. So thanks.
So go ahead. We're ready with questions. If you have one, I think you can raise your hand.
I think, why don't you just, do you want to take your own questions and monitor them? And I'll keep an eye in the chat to see if there's anything you miss, okay?
Susan, good idea. Thanks.
And I'll start with, well, first of all, my first question was, what do you still want us to do? And you already answered that. So I'm glad to have the links and the letters, and please do keep us informed on what you want, because we do all care and love the point.
That, That's important. So we're running these community meetings because for two reasons. One, we want to educate people about the findings of our studies, that preservation is feasible and that it can satisfy the city and the Army Corps requirements, but also to listen to the community and get feedback. But these are precursors to meetings that the Army Corps and CDOT will be holding about their design plan at some future date. We don't know yet. So when those meetings happen, please come. And when they offer you a choice between pink concrete and blue concrete, please say no concrete, fix it. But yeah, that's thank you, Susan, because that's going to be the important step now. Is this is about the community now stepping up and running with this work that we've kind of laid the groundwork for, and really letting their voice be heard.
And
Thank
I want to add also that this presentation has been recorded. So if anybody's missed part of it, or you want to review it, or you want to tell other people about it, we do have a YouTube recording that's available.
And please also feel free to comment about the presentation itself. Was it too long, too short, too dramatic, too whatever? We're doing this. We're learning as we go here.
I think it's great, and I thought I knew all about the point. I've been to your other presentations, but um, it's very energizing and encouraging, and I tend to be optimistic with you, Jack. But so how I wonder the experts that you have found, did you have to find them, or did they in part find you? Are they aware of
No,
what
we
you're doing?
approached all the local firms that we thought would be good candidates, and they all turned us down because of political interference. They were afraid that they would lose city work if they worked for us. So we had to go out. We found this particular engineer through another source in the Army Corps of Engineers on the East Coast who said, "Oh, we've worked with this firm. They've been great for you."
Or it was through the IMI actually,
And through
the
the
Masonry, the Illinois, the Institute, Illinois Masonry Institute, the
yeah.
IMI. They were super helpful in helping us find McLaurin.
So we were just lucky to find a
Yeah,
really good firm, but they
we
had to be out of
interviewed
town.
some stellar people who just
Yeah.
were uneasy about this project. So
But they've primarily, it seems they've primarily worked on coastal projects. Were they excited, interested about doing this
Oh
inland?
yeah, they said said the water is so much clearer in Lake Michigan than it is in the Mississippi River or in New York Harbor, that they were so happy to dive in this water, among other things.
they had a blast. Yeah, they got to interact with people who are sunbathing out on the rocks, and
And we didn't get a permit for this because we didn't think we'd be able to. So they came and they set up, and it was pretty dramatic, the setup, because they had a tent and things for their communications. And at one point, a police helicopter came over and just hovered over us. We thought, "Oh my
we're
God,
like, oh my gosh.
we're in trouble now." So we just waved to them, and they waved
And we
back, and
did.
they flew off.
Yeah, Michael Rackless, our attorney, is on this presentation, but we had Michael on the
In case we got arrested.
yeah, in case we ran into troubles. But yeah, they really had a blast at the point, and they actually won an award for like the best use of drone technology for 2024
Yeah.
2023 on a waterfront structure or on any structure, I guess. So they were in a competition, and they've had a lot of fun with it. They've gotten a lot of attention that we didn't expect.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering about the interaction between among you and your experts.
Oh, they were great to work with.
Oh, yeah.
And
And they were super patient. I mean, at one point we ran out of money, and they were super cool about it. They were like, no problem. Like when you got it, well, we're here.
Wish Jenny,
Um,
that did the historic structures report, we had approached them originally to see if they would do the engineering report, and they were one of the people that said they're the best. They're one of the firms that said, no, we just can't take the risk of doing that. When they saw that what we were doing with McLaren, they came to us and said, we'd like to do the structure report. And their preservation division is just fearless. They don't
Yeah,
care what the city
they're
does.
crackerjack. They're
They're
really
excellent.
stellar.
They're also a firm that worked on the Darrell Bridge, by the way,
Oh, that's good to know.
on behalf of the community, not on behalf of CDOT.
Yeah.
Jerry, I think you had a question.
Oh, well, one thing is, yeah, the drones have been useful also in the whole look at the uh, erosion along the lake shore. And there's a woman run firm that does drones as well. But my question was you said that the Army Corps estimates their plan would be 5 years closing the point, but yours would be only local closing. Do you estimate how long that might take, or don't they know? As a person who lives probably within the range of the noise from whatever's done,
Yeah.
how long do you think it would take to do it segment by segment? About the same time or less, or?
Yeah, it would be 3 to 5 years. It it really
Mhm.
depends. It seems to depend on winter construction.
Yeah.
Um,
And also,
so
we're not going to get to pick the contractor. So it's really going
yeah,
to be a negotiation between the contractor and the
and
owner, which is the Park
the
District
park
and
district
CDOT.
and
So that's how
CDOT is
it's unpredictable.
CDOT is the city agency that's funded for 35% of construction, and then the Army Corps is seeking its 65% contributions. So yeah,
So
great question.
it's good that you have more potentially congenial contacts with the park district and for these negotiations. Does that make your optimism go up even a little bit, Deborah?
Yeah, sure, of course.
The Park District is a very, very bureaucratic organization, and there are lots of people who have been there for a long time that want to do things the way they've always been done. So we're wishing Ramirez Rosa the best of luck here, but he will have an uphill fight.
But he knows he's got some support too.
Yes. Other questions? Okie dokie.
I don't want to monopolize things, but
Please, go ahead.
but does the Army Corps of Engineers solution address the parkland drainage issue?
No, they
Good
kind of
question.
ignore that, but
At least from what we know so far.
in the other structures, concrete structures that they've done in other parts of the lake, there is some addressing to the immediate parkland next to the revetment. It's in some cases worked out fine. In other cases, there's a lot of erosion already. Nonetheless, a lot of erosion. So they've thought about it. Whether they've successfully achieved what they want is not clear.
Yeah,
Nothing as extensive as McLaren is proposing.
right.
Mm.
Yeah, I really didn't, I didn't talk about the service life of these structures. So at the Morgan Shoal community meetings, we learned that the service life for a concrete revetment is 40 years. The usual service life for a limestone revetment is 70 years. So you can see that the block structure has more durability and, as Jack likes to say, more flexibility. It's not a rigid form. It can expand with heat and temperature and cold, and it can also take the wave action in components rather than as one giant structure. But McLaurin was really interesting that if the limestone block structure is maintained over time, it pretty much has an indefinite life.
Yeah.
That it could certainly go another 100 years.
Also about the limestone, very early on, we were told by the Park District that God is not making limestone anymore, so they wouldn't be able to replace it, the ones that need it. McLaurin estimates that 85 to 90% of the blocks that are there are reusable and are in perfectly fine and good shape. So they would need some extra blocks. We went down to Bloomington, Indiana, Debra and I, to talk to
Last
quarries.
May.
There are thousands and thousands of these what are called breakwater blocks available. at a very reasonable price. So that's not a problem with the limestone at all.
Yeah, there's even an inventory of, well, it hasn't been inventory. There's a stockpile of limestone blocks at the east end of the point where when they put in the coffin platform, they just threw the limestone blocks into the lake. So there's actually a repository of blocks there. We just don't know how many. So they could be on site, which is a huge cost savings. But it was kind of amazing when Jack and I went down there. I learned a lot about Indiana quarrying. So it turns out that only 20% of what gets quarried is
useful.
actually useful or saleable. And it's the buff stuff that gets used for building facades. You know, what you see at the University of Chicago or downtown or on the Pentagon, it's the same stone. So these breakwater blocks are the 80%, they're waste materials. So we went down there, there's like acres and acres of them, like hundreds of feet high, of these blocks that we know at the point that are just there. So one of the quarries gave us an incredibly cheap price of $240 a block. So the real cost is the transportation. Which would run about $500 per block. So we're still looking at about $1,000, less than $1,000 for the couple dozen replacement blocks we're estimating.
Certainly, one of the advantages is the fact that the point will stay open during this
Yeah.
instead of being closed for 5 years. And also, you say closed for 5 years, according to the Army Corps of Engineers, but they're going to, how much more than 5 years is it going to be for the point to be back to what it is? I mean, the trees are going to be chopped down, the vegetation will be gone. It'll take more years still for things to recover from their construction.
Yeah, it would be all new landscape.
And at the same time,
It would not be the point we know, that's for sure.
at the same time, Morgan Shoal might well be closed for almost that
5
long,
years,
for 5
too.
years as well during that construction.
I can't thank you enough for this presentation and for the work you're doing.
Well, thank you
Thank
so
you very
much.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you all for attending. We're really grateful.
Well, thank you all.
Okay, thank you.
Save the point.
Bye-bye.
Take care.